realize that as a counselor, I do need to have an appreciation or at least an interest and curiosity in some of the darker aspects of life. I mean, my whole livelihood is going to be based off of people being sad or confused or angry or wounded in some way, shape, or form. I know that the goal is to help people overcome these dark times and grow and change, and there can be a lot of reward in helping people through those life transitions. However, realistically, the majority of my day is going to be spent helping people battle their demons. That can be really intense work, but honestly, I'm kind of looking forward to it. This realization has kind of hit me in the face the last few weeks because we have been studying grief and loss, which sounds like a total bummer, but I've actually really been enjoying it. Now, I do not want to actually specialize as a grief and loss counselor. However, the more I study this material, the more I realize that all of my clients are probably at some point in time going to be dealing with the death of a loved one or unresolved grief from their past. So it'd probably be a good idea for me to know how to handle that when it comes up. The biggest thing that I have learned so far, though, is that grief is not specifically reserved for those people who have experienced loss by death. Loss is prevalent, and it's something that's completely unavoidable in life, and yet grief is something that we usually reserve for those individuals who are dealing with the death. Therefore, grief of the non-death losses can often go unacknowledged and make that life transition even more difficult to adapt to. So a big piece of what we've been learning the last few weeks is helping our clients to identify non-death losses that they have experienced and help them to acknowledge and recognize those and then grieve those things that have often been overlooked. Even something like a planned pregnancy, which is usually seen as a joyous occasion, can have a lot of grief and loss attached to it. Loss of freedom, autonomy, privacy, your body, stability, consistency, routine, and alcohol, just to name a few. So as one of our projects for the class, we've been asked to make a list of all of our losses by death, but then also all of our losses not associated with death, and then talk about how and if we did or were allowed to grieve those instances. Things like divorce, moving, breaking up, formation of a new relationship, moving out of your family home, having a child move out of the house, having a sibling move out of the house, getting fired, getting a promotion, a miscarriage, end of a project, starting school, finishing school, incarceration, release from prison, infertility, natural disasters, loss of possessions, bankruptcy, personal injury, trauma, sexual assault, dementia, failed dreams, loss of a vision, loss of your actual vision, or loss of sense of self, etc., etc., etc. Loss is prevalent, and it turns out that I have a ton in my life that I have never acknowledged or properly grieved. I never even thought that I should be grieving or that it was something that could be grieved. And I've learned that a lot of it isn't even our choice. Some things are just not seen as appropriate to grieve, especially those things like ambiguous losses or disenfranchised losses. An ambiguous loss is when someone is either physically present but psychologically not present, such as when a loved one may be suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's. It can also mean when someone is physically not present but they are psychologically still present, which would be if somebody who you loved was maybe incarcerated. Or even just if somebody who you were dating ghosts you. And I know you've all had that happen. It can't just be me. Disenfranchised loss then is when there is a loss that cannot be socially sanctioned, publicly mourned, or openly acknowledged. This may be something like the end of an affair, or an abortion, or someone who's died from an overdose. All of these losses can have a huge impact on a person's life, and not being allowed or given the time to grieve those losses can actually make the impact of them much longer lasting and harder to bear. It was interesting because I figured when we were going to be learning about grief and loss that we would be learning how to handle clients who were really deep into their grief. But it turns out that's not really a problem at all. If your client is grieving, that's great. Grief is a normal, healthy, and appropriate response to loss. It also helps to heal the wounds after a loss. There is no proper way to grieve. There are no official stages to grief that we can and will and must all move through in a particular order, and there is no time limit on grief. As a counselor, the best thing I can really do with a client who is grieving is validate that grief and then sit with them through their process and let it unfold however it looks for that particular individual. Meanwhile, for all of my clients who are maybe not grieving, I should be trying to help them find things that they haven't grieved, because often those things that we don't grieve are things that hold us back and don't allow us to flourish and grow and move forward. Don't get me wrong, it hurts and it sucks and I don't like grieving, but I now understand that it is really crucial to personal growth and development. That is all I have for you today for a little lesson with a touch of insight. Grieve your losses, everyone, and I will see you next week.